welcome to What I Wish My Parents Knew, Families Making Space for Mental Health. My name is Shannon Strassner. My pronouns are she, her, hers. We are glad you decided to spend some time with us. And again, thank you for your patience. What I Wish My Parents Knew is an action team of the San Diego Military Family Collaborative. And the What I Wish My Parents Knew forums are a collaborative effort between our youth leaders, families, communities, and service providers. The goal of these forums is to bring youth and their parents and caregivers together to talk about often tough to talk about topics and to provide information and tools to help continue to strengthen families. This evening's forum will focus on mental health. This is a big topic, so we'll be focusing on just 3 components of that. So those will be expectations, communication, and the need for support and resources. Throughout the forum, you will hear youth perspectives on these topics, and later Dr. Kasimu Harley will provide some tangible tools for families. So to get us warmed up, let's hear from 4 of our leaders as they answer what comes to mind when you hear mental health. So Morgan, we'll start with you. So next slide.
Hi, so I think what comes to me when I think about mental health is just the words complex and challenging. And I'll pass it over to Gracie.
Sorry about that. So what comes into mind when I hear the words mental health is basically more or less talking about situations when mental health comes into need for like students, adults, kids, anyone of the above. And I'll bring it on to Nick.
Thank you, Gracie. What comes to mind when I think of mental health is the word habits, specifically like what we do in our daily lives that helps inform our mental health, and making good habits can improve our mental health. And I'll pass it to Marissa.
Thank you, Nicholas. What comes to mind when I think of mental health is unfortunately the stigma surrounding it because of what topic it is. And then I'll give it back to Ms. Shannon.
Thanks. Yeah, so that's just a sneak peek into what we're going to hear about today. So I'm going to pass it over to Stacey Childs. She's going to share a little bit more about how these forums are shaped.
Thank you. So as Shannon said, my name is Stacey Childs. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm with State San Diego's Alcohol, Tobacco, and Other Drug Prevention Program stationed at Real Connections at Canyon Hills, and I have the pleasure of working alongside these amazing student leaders. Can you go to the next slide, Mary, too? Before we hear from some of our youth leaders and dive into this topic of families making space for mental health, we want to provide everyone with some context on just how we came up with tonight's topic, which is simple. So all What I Wish My Parents Knew forums are shaped by youth survey results. For this specific forum, we surveyed high school students in September, asking them to fill in the statement of the issue in my school or community that needs the most attention is. And then they were free to kind of fill in that statement. The survey was anonymous and voluntary and open-ended. So students were able to write whatever they wish as their response. And so as you can imagine, we got a spectrum of responses, and we looked at all of the feedback and saw some common themes. We placed each of the responses into buckets that were identified. And then the top themes that most responses fell into were around 1, the issue of race, prejudice, and biases. Another big theme that we pulled out was responses having to do with the care for one's physical health in the school. And then lastly, which we're going to focus on this evening, is around mental health. And so mental health is a super broad topic, but the survey feedback related to mental health focused on 3 main ideas, which the youth leaders are going to elaborate on in just a sec. And those 3 main ideas, and Ms. Shannon kind of just mentioned them, and they are 1, around expectations put upon youth and how that impacts their mental health. Another big main theme is around youth feeling that they need improved communication around mental health. So whether that's within their peer groups or within their parents, our family unit. And lastly, youth voicing a need for additional mental health support and resources around campus. So next up, you'll hear from our 3 student leaders who really function as the voice of our peers. So they will provide a summarized version of this student survey feedback and share their experiences and perspective around these 3 main ideas that I just mentioned. And after the youth share, our subject matter expert will weigh in. And so, yeah, without further ado, I'd first like to introduce Gracie, and she will be sharing the survey results around the first main idea, and that is around expectations put on youth and how that impacts their mental health. So let's get started. You can go to the next slide, and Gracie, you can unmute yourself and share whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ms. Stacy. Good evening. My name is Graciana Seyfried, a part of the Humans for Humanity, and I am here today to talk about how a person's expectations impacts a youth's mental health. From all the feedback I have collected, one peer stated mental health and addressed the situation. Based on the peer's statement, I can come to an agreement that discussing mental health is a very important element in day-to-day life, plus helping to prevent suicide for anyone that may be struggling. On the website classroommentalhealth.org has proved there is a clear connection between mental health and academic performance. Students struggling with depression or other mental illnesses have a harder time feeling motivated, learning, concentrating, taking tests, etc. Therefore, creating a time and space for students to go to will become very beneficial for not just the students themselves, but for the adults to have a better understanding of where the child is coming from.
Thank you, Gracie. And next up, we have Morgan, who's going to be sharing around communications and kind of what is needed around mental health. So you can go to the next slide, please.
Hi, so I'm Morgan, obviously. So I think that it's no surprise that communication is something that's very important in society, as it's useful for peer connections, family connections. It's just good for building relationships, and it's also good for communicating about our issues and sort of getting those off your chest. So obviously the whole focus of this forum is about mental health. And I think that mental health is in sort of a gray area when it comes to communication. I particularly think that students feel less inclined to share about mental health, particularly when it comes to talking about it with peer groups and especially parents, which is why we have some parents here tonight. And I think that mental health is particularly overshadowed by topics such as academic success, sports, and just general communication about any other topic, especially when it comes to families. So I think that one of the big things is that the parents here, I think you should bring the same amount of attention to mental health as you should to sort of academic success and sort of social success in life. Because if you're able to have an open network of communication with your student, I think that you'll find that they'll be overall more inclined to share with you. And I think that, again, establishing that network of communication is extremely important. So that's the first big thing that I think communication needs to be improved upon, especially when it comes to mental health. The second thing is sort of eliminating the stigma behind mental health and sort of also therapy that sort of ties together with it. We as a group and also as a society, we need to learn how to combat this stigma because it's super unhealthy and it's sort of keeping people down from sharing their experiences and getting the help that they need. We also need to learn how to create an environment where students feel comfortable opening up to whether it's their peers, teachers, staff members, or family. And I think that as parents, there's a few things that should be done where you need to sort of get rid of that stigma and sort of make your child feel comfortable sharing. I suppose that a few things you could do is just sort of make it clear to your child that talking about these issues isn't a bad thing. Talking about them, they'll be met with support and that you'll listen to them. I think that's definitely the biggest thing that you could do for them. And I think you shouldn't try to tell them that their mental health problems aren't worth it or that they're not real. That's a huge detriment to your child. And I think that overall, just opening up communication lines with your child to sort of talk about mental health and make sure that they're doing okay, that's definitely going to be something that's beneficial. So, yeah.
Thank you, Morgan. I think definitely the things that just around validation, right? Around, just kind of validating what your child is going through, whether it's around mental health and or any other kind of experience. But in terms of mental health, I think me as parents, we're so quick to say like, just brushing it off. Like, you have a good life. What do you have to be, all you have to do is go to school. And it's not kind of it's those other kind of expectations that Gracie just mentioned, and just kind of creating that space to where there can be that open dialogue and that safe conversation between parents and teens. So very well said. Thank you so much for all of your feedback. And I'm now going to turn it to Forrest. He's going to talk about a lot of the students on the survey mentioned the need for additional mental health supports and resources on campus. And so he's going to weigh in on that for us.
Hello. So for this part, I did notice one of the students actually said noticing students' mental health more often instead of only paying attention to their progress academically. So seeing a student fall behind instead, or a student with poor grades skipping classes, instead of getting angry at them for doing so, asking them if they need help, reaching out and making sure that they have the resources on campus. And then another thing is lack of school advocacy and hearing from students' opinions. That was another thing a student said. And pretty much it's schools not hearing the students' perspectives or not asking for it. So actually at Canyon Hills, we are trying to create a mental health working group that is led by students with the help of, multiple staff on campus, Ms. Shannon, the MFLC counselor and the wellness center. So in this, we'll be creating surveys about what students want to see from the school to help improve mental health on campus, and maybe even presenting to classes about mental health and working with teachers to better understand their students and their mental health. So for self-experiences, for me personally, I've really found it helpful to have these school resources, like having, say, San Diego Rural Connection Center, and then having the Wellness Center, and then the MFLC counselor as well, just to be there to support me when I'm in need. And it's honestly, I feel like without those resources, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. And there are so many schools that don't have those resources, and there's students at our campus that don't even know about those resources as well. So making sure that they feel supported and that they know that these resources are there for them is really important. And then another thing that I would like to end on is campus support for the LGBTQ plus community. As people who are in the LGBTQ plus community are more likely to struggle with mental illnesses, and such as trans people having a 40% higher suicide rate, which is insane. So having that campus support of, bathrooms, gender neutral bathrooms that people can use, making them feel safe on campus, free from, hate of any kind, and normalizing, sharing pronouns, whether you're cis or you're transgender, can just be really helpful. And I'm even working with GSA to get these things in place with school. So yeah, that's it for this section. So I would now like to transition to our next program segment. Next slide. So we are honored to have Dr. Kazmu Harley, sorry if I butchered your name, as our subject matter expert. Dr. Harley is a father, husband, uncle, cousin, and brother. He has spent more than 3 decades working with young people and their families. He is a meditator, martial artist, poet, and a former Marine. In this phase of his life, he is passionate about helping individuals and organizations create thriving environments that facilitate peace and wellness. Dr. Harley, the floor is yours.
Thank you. One of the things I appreciate the fact that Say San Diego gave me this invitation to address you, and also the importance of having student voice involved in the conversation. I think that is pivotal. There are a number of things that surface for me, and one of the things I want to just start with something to ground us, and I just want everybody to just kind of sit up, kind of have a soft gaze, and take yourself to a place that brings you a sense of comfort, wherever that place is. Just a soft gaze. You can close your eyes if you want, but I'm going to, for about 60 seconds, I want you to go to that place. And as you're in that place, I want you to do just a body scan to allow yourself to just send some relaxing energy down your body to your feet and back up for 60 seconds. I'm going to time you right now. So go ahead and do that for me. You're in that place that brings you a sense of calm, wherever that place is. Five, four, three, two, one. Go ahead and open your eyes and give me one word in the chat to just tell me what you experienced in that 60 seconds. Just one word. What did you experience? Pause. Okay. Peaceful. Okay. Rest. Relaxation. Okay. All right. Okay. So thank you. Stillness. Okay. One of the things grounded. So one of the things that I want to just offer up is that's a space you can go to anytime to create a sense of equilibrium for yourself. And when I mention the notion of when I hear mental health, I often think of the notion of wellness, and so there's a whole constellation for wellness. Mind, body, spirit. But there are a number of things. So when you talk about what do we need to do in terms of what can facilitate communication between parents and students, is having an understanding. So one of the things, the notion of communication. So what I want you to think about and give me an idea of from what are some common ground rules that you think you would need, both parents and young people. What are some common ground rules you need to establish a basis for communication. Go ahead and put some things in the chat for me. What are some common ground rules that you need to establish? Okay, respect, privacy. Okay, all right. Okay, place of understanding, acceptance, trust. Okay, non-judgmental. Okay, validation and listening. Okay, and so I'm gonna ask you, young people as well as the parents on the call, if you can write down 3 to 5 critical instances that have shaped who you are as a person. Okay, 3 to 5 critical instances that have shaped you as a person. And young people, I want you to write those down too. 3 to 5 critical instances that have shaped who you are. Okay. And I'm going to ask you, and this is not something you need to do with me. Okay. Um, and I'm glad someone that you put in being a parent. Okay. And so with that, okay, a father, husband, a Marine, a nerd. Okay, all right. Hoorah. One of the things that I want you to think about, okay, with that common ground, is this is a way for you to begin to have a conversation with your young person by sharing those critical instances that have shaped who you are. Okay. And what I want to do is have someone talk to me about or share with me just one thing that takeaway that they'd like to get from this part of the discussion. What's some takeaways that you'd like to get from our time? It's going to be somewhat brief, but I want to give you as much as possible. One thing you'd like to get out of our time together.
Dr. Harley, would you like folks to unmute themselves or put it in the chat?
Yeah, they can put it in the chat or okay, I see how to broach mental health topics with our teens. Okay. Let me just start there in terms of just the common ground. So one of the things that was already suggested in the conversation is approaching it from a non-judgmental point of view. And when you hear things, is to move away from a place of being reactive to being responsive. And what I mean by that is to simply avoid, jumping to conclusions or just generalizations. If your child comes to you and says, I'm feeling depressed, ask some exploratory questions. What's actually going on with you? What's happening? And when I want you to think about, if you imagine your child at the center of a circle and then some spokes around. So when you think about school, family, the community, other activities they're involved in a spoke, in this wheel, I want you to think about that. And if there's some disruption in any of those areas, you can ask them, what's happening with your peers? What's happening with school? Okay. Are there some other concerns that that are coming up that you want to discuss with me? Okay. And having an open mind about that in terms of, and really the whole idea of mental health, that it's okay. If you are stressed out, it's okay. We've all gone through, or we actually experienced the pandemic and its aftermath. And that in itself produced a number of results. One of the things that came out in terms of in the country was the rise in mental health concerns. Okay, because of the social isolation and many of the other things that occurred, it kind of compounded some of the mental health needs of students. And so I think it's really starting out just with an open mind and really seeking other information in terms of just broadening your understanding about a mental health topic. Okay. So the first thing I would say is not jumping to conclusions, would be be one. The second thing would be to explore actually the nature of what's going on with your child. And then if you need to reach out for additional support from a practitioner, is to reach out and get additional information. There are a number of organizations around NAME, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, is one where you can get additional information. So that's one of the pieces. The the other area that I want to have you look at is just what has your experience been with mental illness? Okay, what has your experience been? What have you seen? What have you noticed? And you can unmute yourself, and maybe I can get a couple of comments. Okay.
I can share. In terms of like growing up, the conversation around mental illness in my home was certainly like that's a private matter that we don't bring into the light. That's where we don't talk about that aunt, or we don't talk about that thing, and there was shame around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was one of the things. And actually, Marissa did thank you for over time it becomes less stigmatized, but it still isn't perfect. Yeah, I think one of the things with it, and I mentioned the fact that in my experiences as Marine, if you brought up mental illness, you were considered weak. Okay, and actually, at the time I was in, it would be one of the causes of being discharged, because it was not something that was acceptable. Okay, so I think one of the things over time, things have gotten better. However, still looked upon as a person being weak. But I want you to think about it in terms of when I mentioned the idea of wellness, because there's that whole constellation of wellness, mind, body, spirit. But I think there's a balance that one needs. And so there's an organization called CASTLE, the Collaborative Alliance for Social Emotional Learning. And basically, they have done correlative studies on showing how the social emotional learning that occurs can help to boost the academic capabilities of students. There's a sense when they have a sense of wellness. So that's one of the things that's happening, and it's really I'm excited to hear that many schools are exploring that, because the federal government years ago had a program where they were talking about eliminating barriers to learning, but it was primarily focused on mental health. Okay, so eliminating barriers to learning was an actual train the trainer activity that Placer County took on, and went throughout the state of California to train school leaders on mental health. They actually even had a avatar that taught teachers on how to respond to students in the classroom. For instance, if a student, as one of the students mentioned, if their grades had fallen, they would give teachers instructions on how to respond to that in an empathic way. So those are some things that that are occurring, and actually that information is still around, and eliminating barriers to learning, because it gives actually a nice little dossier on the nature of mental illness, also some of the common excuse me, the common ailments that youth experience: depression, anxiety, as well as they mention attention, ADHD. I won't go into that because I have some other thoughts on the on ADHD. But I think if you want information on ADD, look up something called All Kinds of Minds, and that's a actually a consortium that has some different modalities on how they're dealing with the notion of ADHD. So, and that would be something, you know, I recommend parents check out if that's something that you're dealing with. But primarily, when this notion of communication and barriers, you know, I guess one of the things I put down when that came up with one of our youth speakers, they said communication was an issue. I wanted to get an understanding, if you could just kind of put some notes in the chat, or what are some of the barriers to communicating with your youth about mental illness? What are some of the barriers? Thoughts?
I can kind of share. I think as adults, and I experience this, and as parents, we're so quick to try to fix things and
Okay.
give advice or give kind of fix it for them.
Okay.
But maybe that's not always the right approach.
No, but I think one of the things that, and actually you had me come back to another point I want to ask, but I'm gonna make a note to myself because I want to respond to what you just said. Someone put in fearful of the topic, and I think that's you know, and yeah, I'll be embarrassed to admit that they're struggling. Yeah, okay, yeah, and I think that those are things that when I mentioned before about having parents talk about the critical events that have shaped their life, I think with all of us, we've had experiences in our life that have been, you know, kind of up and down. It wasn't all, you know, roses, you know. So I think that in sharing your story with your child, you can talk about the resilience that was a part of that. Okay, and I think that's an activity that can create a level of empathy. So that's one piece, and the idea of the embarrassment is really, and that's a normal piece, and this idea of shame and talking about a particular ailment, you know, particularly depression or something like that. But depression is one of the most treatable ailments, and if someone's dealing with that, there's a book by Dr. Burns, uh, and it talks about 10 steps to high self-esteem, but don't get caught up in the title, because it really gives some strategies on how to deal with anxiety, depression, um, with some actual strategies on how to mitigate, you know, just the events, dealing with, you know, it takes a cognitive therapy approach, things like that. And the reason I like Dr. Burns is he talks about the balance between a medical treatment as well as the actual skills that one needs to develop to deal with attitudes of depression and anxiety. So that's one of the things. So yeah, 10 days to higher self-esteem, but it's not 10 days. So don't get caught up in the title. It's not 10 days. But it's an actual workbook. And it starts out with the notion of the price of happiness, right? And really it's about, you know, how do we work on ourselves to become better human beings? And then what are some of the things that we want to um, build on? What are some of the things we want to get rid of? One, so the idea of as parents, you know, with our children, we want them to grow and to be responsible adults. Okay, and I think, and that's a good one. I think one of the things that with that that idea of wanting to fix something comes into play because we want to protect our kids. So the challenge for us is sometimes we have to do a pause, and I did the 60-second reset, and that was by Dr. Reggie. I'm blocking on her name, Regina. But one of the things that that can do is help you get grounded. So in that space where you find yourself wanting to fix it, take a pause and begin to explore the dimensions of what's going on, and that's by asking open-ended questions. Okay. And just kind of, knowing, as a parent, you're going to be feeling it because it's your child, and you don't want your child to be in pain. But the idea is to explore it, get them to a place where they know that you love and appreciate them for coming to you, and that you are going to do the best you can to support them through where they are, okay, through and beyond. So that's kind of the process. But know that in terms of that even the shame, the guilt, and all those things are part of it. And we can throw in some think that the whole grief and loss cycle. When you're dealing with an ailment, those things come into play: the denial, the anger, the depression, the bargaining, and then that place of acceptance, where you can get to a place where you really you're dealing with where you are. And that's why I mentioned NAMI, because NAMI has speakers that can come out and talk to students. I've had the pleasure of meeting some folks that experienced the range of mental illness, from everything from bipolar, depression to schizophrenia, that were working with NAMI, and as a result they were in a better state of wellness, where they could come out and talk to others about their story and what they experienced. So that was one thing, and I want to go back up in the chat because there was something that caught my eye, and I want to make sure I respond to you. Okay, come on, cursor. Okay, talking to my cursor now, so hold on. Okay, teen struggling, peers navigating life in general may help in allowing, children to create a safe. Yeah. Just, really, just I think one of the things, there's an activity I do with parents in a workshop, and one of them is having them go back to the age that they were at, that their child is at, right? And actually, what was life like for you then? Okay, what were some of the challenges that you experienced? How did you deal with some of those challenges? Okay, and if and really looking at the strengths and some of the things you would even change, if you were able to go back and do that, right? But I think with that, it's an opportunity, again, creating that level of empathy, because knowing that in adolescence is one of the most challenging periods in our lives, unlike any other period. Even as I move into senior citizenship, it's nothing like adolescence. So I think that giving young people some grace for how they respond. So one of the things, and even talking to young people, one of the things I do in terms of, because sometimes in communication things don't come out right. They sometimes young people have a little edge, and rather than taking that edge personally, is to ask them, could you restate that, or this is how I'm experiencing the way that you're communicating with me now, right? And we have words for it as adults, that sounded disrespectful, that I was offended by that, you were rude, all of that. But I think that one of the things is taking a step back and asking to restate it. Or do you hear yourself? Is one of the phrases I've used with kids. Do you hear yourself? And they're like, well, what? I was just saying that normally. I said, well, okay, let's just restate it. Let me just play this back for you on how it came out. And oftentimes they're like, oh, I didn't know I sounded like that, right? So that's also an opportunity to have them engage in reflection, because the communication cuts both ways. So as young people, the challenge is to be courageous in your communication and give some grace even to your parents, because one of the things, as I said before, as parents, we want our children to thrive. We don't want them to be in pain. And so some of our reaction initially could be out of wanting to take care of you right? So be present with that, but also know that there's nothing that your parents wouldn't do, um, to ensure that you have, the best quality of life. So that's the other piece. Okay, so I'm going to move down the chat. There is something. Okay, all right. I think I got most of the notes. Trying to navigate my little screen here, but it's not cooperating. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Let's see. So Patricia said the name of the book. You got that? There was. Takes courage to share ourselves. Yeah. Yep. Yep. It takes courage, but then taking the risk, right? Taking that risk. And so I think one of the things that I just want to say, young man mentioned that mental health is complex and challenging. Yes, it is, but it's also life is also challenging. Okay, there's a I like the Chinese symbol for crisis, because within that it has crisis and opportunity. So in the complexity of mental health and the challenge of it, there's also an opportunity. And that opportunity comes from being courageous to face what's actually occurring. It takes courage to ask for help. Okay, that's one thing. Even when you think about, if you're in a classroom, young people, if you're in a classroom and you have a fear of raising your hand, but then that one day you reach out and you courageously voice your question, you have a different sense of yourself after that. So those are things I want you to you keep in mind. Think about various communication, but also understand that there are resources for you. Not only, there's a crisis and access line that's available to you, but there's a 211 number. But within your school, there are opportunities for you to create the space to have these courageous conversations about wellness. Okay, because it's about wellness. It's not about it's not about the disease. It's not about mental health. It's about wellness. So how do you create structures within your school to support your wellness? So those are some pieces that I want to leave with you. I'm gonna search through a little note here for anything that I missed. Um, the other piece that I just want to mention is around the developmental stages of young people, and just some of the challenges. So, and there are resources where you can look those things up. I'm not going to go into developmental stages, but I think one of the things I want you to think about is where your child is right now, and some of the things that they experience in terms of with peers and all those kinds of things. There's this notion of separation and individuation, where your child is breaking away from you in some respects, with their own ideas, their identity, and all those things. But in reality, they're still close to the values that you provided them. So that's one thing I just want to say outright. From all of my work with young people, they have not strayed that far from the values that their parents have imparted to them, even though it may look like that. Okay, so that's an area that I want you to just kind of take a breath and know that they're going to be okay, and they're not going to totally stray away from you. But that's going to be a part of them growing into themselves. We all went through that. Okay. In terms of shaping, our own identities. But the idea about creating wellness is about how do we create environments where young people and all of us thrive, even as parents. Oh, and this was the other piece. I know this was about the students and about, what we want parents to know, but also young people know that in terms of checking in with your parents too. Okay. Because they negotiate, just as you negotiate the space between family, school, and home, and your environment and your peers. Those are all spaces that you negotiate on a daily basis without even thinking about it. Same thing for your parents. They negotiate the spaces of work, home, their individual relationships, and all of those things. And there's some things that go on with them. So it'd be nice sometimes to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, how's it going? Are you all right? Oh, okay, I love you. I appreciate you. And that's how it goes. But spend some time in those conversations. And one day, just for fun and giggles, just have a day where either you allow your child to pick out something that they want to do, and you just kind of hang with them to see where it goes. Okay. I mean, I'm not saying that, if they want to go hang glide, and you might want to, kind of pull back a little bit and say, well, you know what, I'm going to sit this one out. Maybe not, but I think that giving them an opportunity to choose something and then just kind of discussing it and then asking like some critical questions about how it's going. One of the things with my kids that helped me with conversations, particularly even when they were young, I would ask them how their day was. And they would always say they did nothing. And I would be like, oh, okay. So how did you do that? And then they would go into they would start describing to me the things that they did. And I was like, oh, okay. So even from elementary school, it's like, you know what? No, you didn't you weren't doing nothing. Look at all these things that you did. And so that began to facilitate a way for us to begin to have deeper conversations. Okay. So I hope that you were able to extract some things from what I was saying. But the bottom line that I want you to consider is with your communication, create some ground rules for how you engage each other. And just some common agreements. And I saw some of those in the beginning about trust, respect, privacy, all those things. But whatever those constructs are for you and your family, have those as your guiding light. And then recognize when you're moving away from that. In terms of when things get a little sticky, allow yourself to take a pause, get regrounded, and then come back to it. But the bottom line between youth and parents in facilitating communication is giving each other grace as human beings. And know that there was a quote by James Baldwin, which says that basically no problem can't be faced, unless you actually look at it. So I'm paraphrasing, but that pretty much is how it goes. All right. So thanks for your time, and I'll be hanging around a little bit for some questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Harley, for giving us the tools to communicate about mental health. And we're going to move on to the panel portion really quickly. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Lisa Bridges, who is the program manager of SAY San Diego's alcohol, tobacco, and other drug prevention programs in the North Central region. Thank you.
Thanks, Marissa. Wow. I just want to say that was really, really informative. I had a plethora of questions that I was prepared to ask, and I think that you really gave us a great overview. You gave us tools of how to create a supportive culture where youth can feel safe, and you even helped us understand what we might be able to do when we think that our young person might be experiencing a mental crisis of some sort, mental health crisis. I do want to ask you one particular question, Dr. Harley, and that would be, a lot of times parents, they may view that their teens' drug or alcohol use, it's a typical experiential thing that they're going to go through. Teens experiment, but we know that when we have those type of maladaptive coping behaviors, that it really can be a symptom of something that is more serious. and it's triggered by trauma and by stress. So could you shed just briefly a little bit about how families can address this topic from two perspectives, from a preventative lens and then also from a reactive lens? One of the things that you said is that we have to learn how to move from being reactive to responsive. So what might that look like when we think that, you know, a young person in our family might be experiencing alcohol or drug use, and it's related to poor coping skills?
Okay. Thank you for that question. And one of the things, had some experience working in the adult, actually with youth in alcohol drug treatment as well as adults. And you're absolutely correct in the statement that there's something else that's going on that propels a young person to experiment. You know, and you know, sometimes it may be about experimenting, but the other thing that we need to look a little deeper to explore what's actually happening with that young person. So that's the idea of being responsive, so that looking and asking deeper questions about one, again, if we were to put the child at the center and take, say, their peers, school, and all those things, and as spokes in a wheel, if we start to ask questions, what's happening in this environment? What's going on? What's happening? Are you well? Right? And they might say yes, but and see what you notice. If you notice some changes in their peer relationships, if you notice changes in school, if you notice some changes in, you know, overall interaction with others, family members, just what you notice, and so that can be instrumental in your response. So the preventive part comes in really in just kind of having a conversation about drugs and alcohol. One of my parenting and teenagers courses, for instance, if your young person goes to a party, and have you had a discussion with them about if there's vaping or other things happening at the party, and the person offers them a ride home, what would they do in that situation? Or if someone offered them, are you having those kinds of conversations? And those are things to begin to have. And you're like, what would you do? And they may ask you, well, did you do it? And just it's kind of, it's ante up time to be honest about what you actually did. And so those are some things. And then I think the idea of looking deeper into what's actually occurring is really important, because in my experience with the adults that were in drug treatment, their earliest onset was a young person that was 11, but clearly there was some trauma happening in their environment. Okay, so those are some things. So notice what's happening around them and how they're expressing it, because everyone responds to trauma in a different way. Some people will have some symptoms and others won't. But just kind of checking in with others to see what's happening.
It's good. It's good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I want to switch to Nick. Hey, Nick, have a question for you. So from your experience, can you speak to mental health supports and resources that have worked well on campus? So tell us a little bit about what you're involved in and some of the things that you have seen that actually are working well or have the capacity to work well.
So from my experience, whether it's with friends or just interacting with my peers and looking at like all the different mental health supports that we have at our school, I think, of course, the baseline, I guess, that we have is having the counselor's office always open and having that being a place for students to just go and have someone to talk to and have someone to help them address especially academic related issues that have to do with their mental health. Then we have our wellness center on our campus that is very helpful when it comes to supporting students, whether it's one-on-one or just having a space for students to go during at lunch or at a different time when they need some type of support with wellness, mental health, and just having that open space as well. And this is not quite an on-campus thing, but the new advent of mental health excused absences, making that an opportunity within our district for any students who need that outlet, and making sure that students feel comfortable utilizing that when they need it. And then we have clubs and support groups of various types that are open to all students, where students can come and do something that's that applies to them, or just talk with people who have related experience.
Okay, great. That's an awesome answer. Awesome answer.
I'm curious. I'm sorry. What district is your school in, Nicholas?
San Diego Unified.
Okay. Yeah, that program for the mental health days originated in the Pacific Northwest with some young people that actually started some advocacy. So
I have one more question. I think I have time, Stacy and Shannon, for one more question. And so I don't know which young person you'd like to answer this, but we've heard a lot today, right? From Dr. Harley, you guys have shared a lot, but how can the adults in your life create an environment so that you can begin feeling comfortable talking about mental health? And I'm even going to flip it, as Dr. Harley said, talking about wellness. So whether you're talking about wellness or you're talking about mental health, how can adults in your life begin creating an environment where you're comfortable doing that? Stacy, who would you like to answer that?
Marissa, are you comfortable answering that?
Yeah, sure.
Great.
So in terms of creating a safe space, I'm pretty sure Miss Stacy touched on this a little bit, but like a lot of the times when you approach parents with a problem, their first go-to instinct is to like fix it. And that's true of a lot of people, but sometimes it's good in a situation to just have someone who's open and willing to listen. And then also what Dr. Harley touched on when talking about how giving parents the space to communicate with their children as well, and being receptive to criticism and feedback from both sides, because it is a both sides issue. All working relationships are made out of two people, so you have to be able to communicate with one another efficiently.
Wow. That is like awesome. That's a really dope answer. Thank you so very, very much. Well, we could go on and on, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So thank you so much. I think that we really learned so much from Dr. Harley, from our panelists, Marissa and Nick. Thank you guys so much. It was a little bit of time, but man, you guys really packed it full with some really good tidbits. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Shannon. There you go, Shannon.
Thank you. Mary, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you all for your time. Again, thank you to everybody for your patience along this our little hiccup, but we appreciate you. We appreciate all of our youth leaders. Dr. Harley, thank you. Lisa, thank you. Stacy. And so our next forum is in February. It again will be informed by our students' survey responses. And if you have any questions along the way, anything that we talked about, my email is up on the screen. Feel free to email me if there's anything that I can maybe link you to that was mentioned today. And have a great evening. Have a great holiday, whatever that is for you. And we will see you in February. Thank you.